President Joe Biden is proposing changes to the very structure of the U.S. Supreme Court. If he succeeds, it really could be the end of democracy. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, and this is First Liberty Live. We're coming to you from our headquarters in Texas live today because we wanted to do a quick reaction to the proposals that the president dropped on the country yesterday. Our guest today is Jeff Mateer, our Chief Legal Officer. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Stuart.
Thanks for taking time to share with us. He's who I wanted to talk to because he is one of the top experts in the country when it comes to these things, and I figured you'd want to hear from him as well. So the president published an editorial in the Washington Post, and then he read a teleprompter speech on Monday, making the very same point. And it's all built around this claim. I want to quote it. He said, "Extremism is undermining the public confidence in the court's decisions." And now Joe Biden looks at conservative justices on the court and says extremism. When the founders look at those same justices, what would they see?
I mean, they would call them originalists. They would be originalism, which is what they intended. It's constitutionalism. Lots of good words. The extremism is Joe Biden, to fundamentally change our courts, something that's existed for hundreds of years, that served us very, very well. And when you compare throughout the world, what system is more enduring than our constitutional republic that's anchored by an independent judiciary?
And what's extreme that the founders did, I mean, if you want to use his language, is they protected the Constitution from overreach like this.
No, it's exactly. I mean, in their wisdom, and let's give Alexander Hamilton credit, because it was Alexander Hamilton, and I won't break into any of the songs from Hamilton, Stuart.
Thank you for that.
Well, I know it would be a little bit too much, but Hamilton's vision and the vision of separation of powers, that you would have three co-equal branches of government. And the core being to protect individual liberties, the core being the independent judiciary.
Now, during an election season, and Joe Biden no longer a candidate, but he still talks like one, they always talk about bold initiatives. It's always a bold reform, a bold initiative, a bold proposal. So he proposed three bold reforms, and notably did not suggest a fourth that's being talked about, and we'll discuss that before we're done here as well, because people are putting millions of dollars behind that particular suggestion. But the first of the three that Biden talked about, it's outside our mission as an organization. We do religious freedom cases. That's all we do exclusively. But I did figure our followers would want to hear from you as a trusted expert about this first one. So I'm going to ask your opinion on it. Here's what he said, quote, "First, I am calling for a constitutional amendment called the No One Is Above the Law Amendment. It would make clear that there is no immunity for crimes a former president committed while in office." What do you make of that?
I mean, it's politics, and that's simply what it is. I mean, they don't like a court decision, and the court decision was the U.S. versus Trump case that actually limited the power of the president. And what they did is they explained when a president has immunity. Yeah. And what the court said basically was that the president does have immunity when the president takes official acts. He doesn't have immunity when he takes non-official acts. I mean, that's actually pretty common sense reasoning. Yeah. And, quite frankly, if Biden, and I don't know, maybe Biden doesn't even know what he's proposing, and we can speculate about, does he really know? Yeah. He should be concerned if this constitutional amendment passed. Obama should be concerned if this constitutional amendment passed, because it would then cause any president's actions, any actions they take in office, even pursuing their job, doing official acts, it would cause them to potential liability. And that's not what the founders intended at all. And so the Supreme Court got the case right. A president has immunity when the president takes official actions. All right.
Here's the second quote, the second proposed reform, and I'm going to quote it here. "Second, we have had term limits for presidents for nearly 75 years. We should have the same for Supreme Court justices. The United States is the only major constitutional democracy that gives lifetime seats to its high court." Now, he suggests an 18-year term with the new justice being placed on the court every 2 years, just on a regular basis. What's your response to that? Is that a good idea?
I mean, I agree with what then Senator Biden said about the court packing idea, because this really is, it's another way to pack the court, because it's really an attempt to remove conservative justices. It just happens that the first justices who would roll off are the conservative justices.
Thomas, Alito.
Alito and Robertson and on. And so it's clearly politics at its worst. And this idea that we're going to compare it to other countries, well, in America, I mean, we are the original. There's a reason for that. We believe in courts that are going to be independent. We believe in the separation of powers. When you give authority to a president to remove justices and you make them basically susceptible to what the president wants to do, they're no longer independent. I have to mention, I think it's ironic that a person who served 36 years in the United States Senate is the one now proposing another branch of government have term limits. I mean, that doesn't escape me. But in the end, I mean, term limits were not what the founders envisioned. And the other thing is, with regard to term limits, is this is not something that Congress can do. This also would require a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
The founders in the Constitution provided for lifetime appointments of Supreme Court justices.
Let's talk about that for a bit. Why is that? I mean, why is it that the founders said, once you're on the courts as a federal judge, you have a lifetime appointment? What's the significance of that? There's more to it than most people think.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back again to the independent judiciary. The founders envisioned they wanted a judiciary that was not dependent on either branch, either Congress, either other branch, either Congress or the executive.
Yeah.
Additionally, the founders believed that judges needed to be those who protected our individual liberties. And so they needed to be independent because, and of course for us at First Liberty, what is the individual liberty that our mission centers upon?
The very first one.
The very first one, which is protecting religious liberty, the one that all other liberties are built upon. And so if you have a court that is just dependent on what the president wants, and you can be removed, and they're not focused on protecting individual liberties, then term limits just threaten all that.
And part of the structure, part of the design of our federal government in three separate branches, the legislative branch, you've got the House, they're all elected every 2 years. It's meant to be hot and cold. It's meant to change with the times rapidly. But then they said, okay, over in the Senate, we're going to give you 6-year terms, so you don't have to be thinking about constantly re-election, and 1/3 rotates through every 6 years. The presidency, they didn't set a limit initially, but later on, a constitutional amendment added, you can only serve twice. That's why that is. So they made each one a little different, but particularly the Supreme Court, they said, you know what, that's for life, to free you up from all the concerns you were just talking about.
No, that's right. I mean, the judiciary needs to be independent, and the way that they're independent is you can't threaten their job. Now, I would also say this is, if a judge went rogue, yeah, there is impeachment.
Yep.
Now, that's a serious thing, but at the same time, it is an option. And so if someone, it can't be, they went rogue, or let's say, for instance, they weren't able to fulfill the duties of their office. Not that that brings up any one we would think of right now, but if we had a Supreme Court justice who was, suffering for some disease or had some mental incapacity, then there is a way to remove them. Term limits is not the answer. Term limits makes the court just another political institution. That's not what the founders envisioned.
All right. The third thing he called for is a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. I dare say most people would hear that and go, well, that seems like a good idea, but there is one already.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court already has a code of ethics.
Established by
the courts, because again, you can't have Congress dictating or a president dictating, we want you to do these certain things. We want you to comply, and we're going to interpret whether or not you comply with that. If that's the case, then the courts would be subject to the Congress or the president. And so, yes, a code of ethics, in theory, not a bad thing. Well, guess what? The court and all judges have a code of ethics, and they enforce their code of ethics. If we think someone is doing something improper, let's say, for instance, that some party in a case had bribed a Supreme Court justice, Okay, first off, that does violate their code of ethics.
Yeah.
So that judge would be in trouble. But let's say they didn't have a code of ethics. Well, you know what? If we knew that, then you impeach that judge. But none of that's happened. And again, this code of ethics, all it is it's an attack on really two conservative justices, on Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. They've done nothing wrong. They've complied with the rules at the time that the rules were in force. Since there have been new rules, they've supplemented their reports. And again, no party in any case has influenced them. So this, again, is just, it's a partisan attack. It's a partisan attack.
And part of what really demonstrates that is who's being accused. I mean, we've all been seeing the headlines. We're not going to pretend we're blind to them. But they always seem to focus on a couple of the conservative justices, when in fact, the records show that the liberal justices on the court over the years have done much of the same thing. But nobody's pointing that out.
No, we're not looking at Sotomayor and her trips or Kagan and her book deal.
Yeah.
We're only going to focus on Justices Thomas and Justice Alito, who just happen to be the most conservative members of the court, who just happen to be the most originalist on the court and committed to the rule of law and to our founding.
All right. The next reform is one that he didn't mention, and that is, well, let me make sure I'm saying this right. Blah, blah, blah. This is it. He makes this claim coming out of that. I was trying to find my place in my notes. He says, quote, all three of these reforms are supported by a majority of Americans, and then there's an M dash, as well as conservative and liberal constitutional scholars. Now, I read that, and I edit stuff for a living. The sentence is structured in a very sneaky way to make it sound like a majority of conservative and liberal scholars agree. Do they?
No, and I mean, even one of the most liberal law professors at Cal Berkeley, Edwin Sherminsky, and I probably got that wrong, but folks can look it up.
Yeah.
A well-known left-leaning liberal is saying, look, the term limits, what you're proposing, you can't do that. That would take a constitutional amendment. So that's the leading liberal saying you can't do what you're proposing, President Biden. Yeah. But beyond that, I don't know a conservative who believes that any of these ideas are good ideas or would violate and would not violate the understanding of the founders. So it's politics. Stuart, I think the most troubling thing is, I mean, obviously, Joe Biden is no longer a candidate. He's giving a speech. Probably maybe it was written sometime before he is withdrawn. Yeah. But he's beginning to carry water for Kamala Harris. And the scary thing is, look, each of these three proposals are horrible. And as Speaker Mike Johnson said, they should be dead on arrival. And fortunately, they will be in the U.S. House. The bigger fight, and I think you alluded to this in the introduction, the bigger fight is the one that these precede, which is an attempt to pack the court.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that is the fourth reform that he notably did not mention in the op-ed. He didn't mention it in his speech, but we're hearing that there are left-wing organizations that are spending tens of millions of dollars to push for exactly that. And it's the idea of, it's hard for most of us to comprehend, because since before the light bulb was invented, there have been 9 seats on the U.S. Supreme Court. I dare say if you ask most Americans, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you there are 9, but if they know there are 9, they probably think that number is set in stone somewhere, but it's not. But it has been more than 150 years since it changed. And what they're proposing is not adding 1 more seat or 2 more seats or 3 more seats, but the magic number seems to be 4 more seats.
And why does that work?
Well, because if you take 6 and 3 and you add 4, you get 7 and 6, and suddenly you have a majority. One of my liberal friends on Facebook said, well, he just wants to equalize the court. I'm like, no, that wouldn't be the result of giving a certain majority to a particular point of view about the Constitution. He wants to take over the court through court packing.
Well, no, and where would it stop? Because it makes the court a political football. Because you've got, this time the Democrats add 4, makes it 7-6. Then Republicans get back in power, and they'll add 2 and make it 8-7.
Or 3.
Or 3 or
Why
whatever.
not?
And then the Democrats come back, and then at the end we have like a Venezuela situation where you've got, more members of the Supreme Court than members of the legislature, and that's what it would become, a legislative body that's actually controlled by the President of the United States. I mean, Look, the reality is the reason these groups are proposing that is they don't like the fact that the court is now interpreting the Constitution pursuant to its original meaning.
Yeah.
And so we've gone back to actually real constitutionalism, real protecting the rule of law. And the scary thing is, and some of our viewers probably haven't heard this, is that Kamala Harris, one, has said repeatedly she's very open to this idea. Now, Biden had not said that previous to this speech, and he's still not talking about court packing per se.
Yeah.
He's talking about these reforms. Harris has actually said she's open to the ideas of court packing. And what really kind of gives me a little angst is the person, one of the groups leading this effort is an organization, a left-wing group called Demand Justice, Demand for Justice. Yeah. It is led by a very high-ranking former Kamala Harris staffer. So this is someone very much, I mean, so think that, you know, Kelly Shackelford were becoming president and I was leading a group. What do you think? Kelly and I would be aligned on things?
I would think so.
I would think so. I would think so. So it's a real threat. It's a real threat. It's something that we need to be vigilant about. We need to be talking about. We need to be educating Americans about.
Now, keeping this practical, he's currently, by definition, a lame duck president. He's not going to run again. He's not the candidate. He's only got a few months left. He does not have control of the House. They only have a slim majority in the Senate. There's no real possibility at the moment that this can happen. So what's this about?
Well, it can't happen today, but it could happen in the future, and this is the start of it.
Yeah.
But what this is really about is making the Supreme Court a political issue. I mean, the left wing has decided it wants to run against the U.S. Supreme Court, and part of that is proposing these radical reforms. And so, I think yes. Is it going to happen next month? No. But if we don't call it out for what it is today, then it's just going to build, and it's going to continue to build. And so I think we just need to be vigilant, and we need to educate our other Americans about it.
Yeah, and just real briefly, I want to put this into context, and that is, I've heard legal experts say that we're in an era where for the first time in maybe 50 years or more, we have a conservative majority, and by that I mean justices on the court who see the Constitution as the measure, and they hold law up to the Constitution and say, what did the original authors of this document mean, and interpret it that way, as opposed to, what do I want today? You know, what's my idea about what the law ought to be? How's society changed? For most of our lifetimes, and for many people watching their entire lifetimes, the court has been the other direction, where they have been passing really bad decisions that aren't based on constitutional understanding. It's just something they wanted to do. And now we're in an era where they're undoing some of that. That was the Dobbs decision. That was, in the Kennedy case, they got rid of the Lemon test. In the Groff case, they got rid of an understanding of the Smith decision. The current court is undoing a lot of these bad decisions that happened in the past. That's what's really going on here, is the left, if you will, is losing ground because the Supreme Court is finally returning to its roots.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head with the hammer, Stuart. I mean, what this is really about is, and it's really kind of ironic, because you would think that of all people, that those on the left would be about protecting individual liberties, but it's actually the opposite. It's the left who does not like the fact that individual liberties are being protected. That, for instance, and you brought up our friend Gerald Groff. Mm-hmm. I mean, his very important case, which took an originalistic, textualist view of a statute. Well, that had been misinterpreted for 40 years. That's because you have conservatives who actually believe words mean what they say, not what we want them to say. The same thing in the Coach Kennedy case, that we're going to go back and look at what was the original understanding, what's the history and tradition around the establishment of religion. That's more protection. So one would think that our friends on the left would want to protect individual liberties like religious liberty, but that's not their game plan. And that's why these dark money groups are pouring in. I mean, I saw one report, over $30 million one group is committed to transforming our U.S. Supreme Court. A U.S. Supreme Court that as an advocate for religious liberty has given us more freedom today than we've ever had in our lifetime. Yeah. They want to take that away from us. That's the battle.
That's true. And if you haven't already, we invite you to go to our supremecoup.com. That's Supreme, C-O-U-P for coup.com website. We have a lot of resources and materials there that will let you understand at a deeper level some of what's going on in the nation's capital as this is being fought out. We've been on this for a couple of years now, and will continue to encourage Americans to have a better understanding. Because once you understand what this is about, the obvious solution is to take a constitutional stand, to stand with the founders on this, and to push back against these efforts to undo democracy.
Exactly, Sturt. I mean, this, obviously, the Democrat Party has made a decision that they want this to be an issue this election cycle. And we need to stop it right now. We need to speak out against it, and we need to let people know that this would, and you started out, I mean, it truly would, if these reforms were passed, if Democrats are able to pack the Supreme Court, it would, I mean, not just threaten our democracy, it would destroy our democracy, and we wouldn't have the constitutional republic that we have today.
And we are not given to overstatement here. I mean, that's
I don't think so. I'm not known for that exactly, but I mean, this is a serious threat.
Very good. Jeff, thank you so much for your input.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate what you do. If you'd like to help us push back against this, consider donating on the supremecoup.com website, Supreme, C-O-U-P, coup.com, and you can help us to keep the Supreme Court as the founders intended. First Liberty is fighting